They're broken down and defeated, deterred, busy and confused, sleeping. You're dying while I wait you to get started on the journey chosen, wasted, now it's selected. I was so bad, what happened? Fall out of the sky and crush me in my smile. I was so bad, what happened? Fall out of the sky and crush me in my smile. Sober, sad and jaded. They're not coming, they're broken down and defeated. You are dying while I wait you to get started. You are dying while I wait you to get started. I was so bad, what happened? Fall out of the sky, yeah. Crush me in my smile. I was so bad, what happened? Fall out of the sky and crush me in my smile.
I'm a motherfucking unicorn, a one-of-one. The vibe being the love and light, the enlightened one. My karma isn't just stellar, I live by truth. Fighting evil, my scars are living proof. Protecting you from the storms with all my might. Love me, I will treat you right. You ever cross me, it's the last thing you'll ever do. With my crown of thorns, I'll wreck you. I ain't playing, yo, Bryan hard, call me a saint. Too bad Chris, because Bigfoot knows my name. I'm a messenger of God, with loyalty I serve. Taking out all evil with his holy word. A true Knights Templar, sword in hand. Slice you up, bury you in the sand. I'm a motherfucking unicorn, you'll never find anyone like me. Born in the Bronx, raised in NYC. So listen up, take heed. I float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. A true Knights Templar, sword in hand. Slice you up, bury you in the sand. I'm a motherfucking unicorn, you'll never find anyone like me. Born in the Bronx, raised in NYC. So listen up, take heed. I float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
That is the Crossing Realms Conference. It is taking place this September 19th to the 20th. Hosts are BRM, Michelle, Krista, Brandy, Tex, and a whole bunch more. Paranormal Paul, sorry, you're in there too. Go get your tickets on Eventbrite. It is going to be awesome. I'm going to be there. There's a slew of guests, as you've seen. But let's not worry about the Cryptid Conference and the Crossing Realms Conference when we can get into the Twilight Zone. And to join me is a man who's, the prettier end. There's Mark Eddy. And I want to welcome the guest. I want to get right to this. Arlen Schumer.
Hey,
Arlen, welcome to the broadcast. I'm going to switch you around to the big square. And then I'm going to be moving up to the top and Mark's to the bottom. Welcome to Third Eye Live. Totally different. I like when you open up your consciousness, your third eye. I think Rod would love this because of the principle behind it. And Arlen, from a brief history, I'm not going to go into the full details. Artist,
say something. The original third eye in pop culture.
That's another reason.
Twilight Zone eyeball in outer space, which is the very first image I saw as a child that I can remember. I had to be 4.5 years old.
I totally understand it because that's one of the things that got me with the Twilight Zone.
Yep.
Black and white, and it was reruns.
I grew up with it.
Yeah, so did I.
Absolutely.
And you just don't forget it. It was like no other show. But you are the author. Yes. I mean, I'll tell you what. When growing up, we used to watch the Twilight Zone marathon. But this was the book we had. I don't know if you remember the Twilight Zone companion of every episode.
I remember it. Are you ready for this? My first story? Yeah. I tried to be the art director of that book.
Oh, my God. Really?
I was working in New York City in the PBS art department, Channel 13 in New York.
Right
out of Rhode Island School of Design, majoring in graphic design. And it's 1981, and the Twilight Zone magazine came out. And maybe it was there that I read that there was going to be a book called The Twilight Zone Companion from Bantam Books.
Yeah.
And I'm working, in the art department, and I decide, like a cartoon light bulb hanging over my head,
right,
that I've got to be the art director of that book. Now, I had come out of Rhode Island School of Design with, a graphic design degree. The graphic design we learned about book design was called the concrete book. And what that meant was every design choice you make in a book, from the format to the typeface, should tie into the subject matter of the book. Form follows function. Yep. So if you're doing a book about the history of American railroads, maybe you'll have little train tracks of typography or something. Every decision makes the book a reflection of that book. So late at night, for nights on end, I started photographing Twilight Zone episode images, setting up a Nikon camera with a tripod in front of my black and white TV in my 13th Street, 6th floor tenement apartment that I was living in and working in, living life, right, as a kid out of school. Anyway, I worked up an accordion fold proposal book that took Serling's opening phrase, "There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man," and over a number of pages, because I learned this technique at RISD, were those television images that I was treating like black and white art photography. Now, a little sidebar, in the late 70s is when video art first came into vogue in the art world. Yeah. Artists were taking pictures. You know how the old TVs, you used to go behind the back with the horizontal and vertical and make abstract, right? They were taking pictures of the abstract imagery and blowing them up and framing them and putting them on walls of galleries. And I'll never forget, late 70s, I'm at RISD, and I looked at that and I said, I bet you if I took pictures of Twilight Zone episodes, this is before the Twilight Zone Companion. This is like 1977, 78. And I'm thinking, I bet you they would look like beautiful black and white art photography. You got to remember, the Museum of Modern Art only established their photography department in 1975. So the idea of black and white photography as art, Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run album cover, 1975, the same year,
Right.
it's a classic piece of black and white art as an album cover, right? So this is the way I thought, because I always knew, even as a kid, when you flipped around the dial and you landed on the Twilight Zone, even though there were other black and white shows, I Love Lucy, The Honeymooners, whatever, there was something about the Twilight Zone that looked different, that felt different. And I tried to capture that with my photographs. So I'd be watching an episode, 12 o'clock midnight on WPIX, right after The Honeymooners at 11:30. And if I saw an image that just looked graphic, that just looked cool, that just felt like Twilight Zone, I snapped a picture. And I made the dummy book, sent it to Bantam with a cover letter. They were in New York City. And it was sent back to me with their cover letter, basically telling me, thank you for your proposal, but we're going to design the book in-house. And when I realized it was going to be an episode guide, you got to remember, before the Twilight Zone Companion, there was only one book about a TV show, The Making of Star Trek. That was it. Twilight Zone Companion is literally the second book about a TV show. You go to a bookstore now, there's a whole wall of books about television, right? But you got to remember, so Zikri's book, I figured, I won't be able to art direct that book because I wanted to do more of an art book, a concrete book that tried to get across the feeling of the Twilight Zone. The shape of the book should be like a black and white television set. Well, a friend of mine that I was working with looked at my work and he said, Arlen, why don't you do your own book about the Twilight Zone? Well, it wasn't this book. I'm going to hold up this book, 1990 from Chronicle Books. It took me 10 years. This is still the only coffee table art book about a TV show. And look, I ended up treating the television images as black and white art. And then I extracted dialogue and narration and treated it like poetry. So these are images from 2 different episodes, and dialogue treated like poetry from a 3rd episode. And look at what I did underneath the dust jacket. I got to emboss the Twilight Zone eyeball. I was 4.5 years old. It had to be in 1963 when this debuted, the 1-hour season. And I was 4.5 years old. And I remember this image imprinting itself in my brain. So ever since this book came out in 1990 from Chronicle, I started to write capsule descriptions of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes. And over the next 30 plus years, that resulted in the book that I just put out from Bear Manor Media, that I also designed every page of. I ghosted images behind the type like that. What do you call it? Behind the scenes photographs, subject matter that was pertaining to the culture of the time. But basically, this book is 68 episodes that I divided into 5 themes that I feel best represent Serling's basically auteurist vision of the Twilight Zone. And all the writers like Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont, who wrote the 2nd and 3rd amount of Twilight Zone episodes, they all wrote, subconsciously or unconsciously, to the themes that I coined back in 1990 after my book came out in 91. And I was given a chance to program 5 days of episodes bracketing a lecture that I did at the Chicago Museum of Broadcast Communications. So I had 5 days in the spring of 91 to basically pick my favorite episodes. And I needed 5 themes. And they almost came to me, Bryan, immediately. Science and superstition, coming from Serling's opening theme. There's between life and death, between science and superstition. So those are the science fiction episodes, which most people associate mostly with the Twilight Zone, that it was a science fiction show. It was, of course, more than that. It was fantasy. It was horror at times. And I make it a point in my essays to bring out that it was surrealism on television, because the word surreal in French means on top of reality. The original surrealist poets in the 1920s and 30s wanted people to step back from their experience, from their natural life, and view it from atop, from a new perspective. And that brings in other realities. You know, even the phrase paranormal that is so popular, right, Bryan and Mark? Twilight Zone was the first television show to introduce the paranormal, surreal. I think if the original surrealists could look in a crystal ball in 1929 and see Serling's Twilight Zone, they would accept him as a surrealist. So Science and Superstition is not only the great science fiction episodes, but also the ones that dealt with superstition or feelings versus logic and reason and rational science versus superstition versus visions, hallucinations, delusions. The greatest Twilight Zone episodes, basically. The second theme I dubbed Suburban Nightmares, because so many of the greatest Twilight Zone episodes are about when our average daily reality suddenly shifts, turns upside down, becomes surreal. And that is such an essential part of the Serling shows these like very average American landscapes, like a shopping mall, like a bus station, average, you know, post-war American fears. I remember as a kid, I grew up around shopping malls in Paramus, New Jersey. They were the theme parks of our youth. But as enticing as they were, I remember having this childhood fear of what would it be like to be locked in a department store alone at night. Now, I don't know whether that came from the Twilight Zone episode, The After Hours, right? With Anne Francis and her immortal role as the mannequin that comes to life. But Serling was able to key in on those. And so did Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont. The third theme is a question of identity. That had the most episodes of the 68, 18 episodes in a question of identity, 17 in Science and Superstition, 10 in Suburban Nightmares. But the ones in a question of identity, the very first episode of the Twilight Zone, Where Is Everybody? With Earl Holliman, who just passed away, I think, last year, is a ex-astronaut in a deserted American town, totally alone, right? And that's the very first episode. He says right to the camera, there's a question as to my identity. I don't know who I am. So in the very first episode, Serling lays out pretty much all 5 themes. That's what makes it a great pilot episode.
Right.
Then you get the theme Obsolete Man, which comes from a Twilight Zone episode called The Obsolete Man, you know, with Burgess Meredith.
Yep.
As the librarian named a little too on the nose, Wordsworth. You know, Serling, he loved things like that, right?
He did that. Yeah, that was
like Wordsworth, right?
He always did things like that. It was very interesting. If you listen, and some people just were enamored by the artwork and the vision. Other people were paying attention. There's a difference, you know, like people, it's art. Some people they just take in the whole thing and they really appreciate that. Some people appreciate the negative space versus the positive. But with Serling, it's like Easter eggs. He just drops like Wordsworth. You know, it matches Burgess, you know, what's going to take place. I mean, he really does lead you up like popcorn, you know.
Well, he mastered the 25-minute dramatic anthology television show format, which hasn't existed ever since. Serling mastered it. You know, I make it a point to say Serling didn't invent science fiction, but he adapted some of its greatest stories and brought the great science fiction writers like Matheson and Beaumont in on the Twilight Zone. And it's that he adapted this incredible subculture that, you know, the science fiction movies of the 50s weren't adapting the great stories. You know, they were doing giant bug movies. Serling loved science fiction, took it seriously. And he was a master adapter. I think out of the 41 episodes of the 68 that are his, A dozen of them are adaptations. Some of the greatest episodes people don't realize, like Time Enough at Last, one of the obsolete men, also Burgess Meredith, right?
Yes.
Left alone on the library steps, his glass is broken.
I love that.
Well,
I love that.
people love it for the cruelty of the ending.
Yeah, it's just
Serling, there was an adaptation by Serling. The original author, Lynn Venable, I'm assuming that was a woman, that's her ending. It's a very cruel ending. You've made us fall in love with this character. Remember his wife, the ultimate horrible wife that ripped up his poetry book? I mean, you made us love this character. He finally gets he's like Charlie Brown, finally kicking the football. He gets what he wants to read his books. And then his glasses break. That is a cruel deus ex machina, almost twist of fate, that it violates the unspoken connection between a storyteller and an audience. You cannot make us love a character and then, for no fault of his own, strike him down for no reason. But that's why people remember that episode for the cruelty. I believe, had that been a Serling original, he would have ended it with him reading the books on the steps, content to finally have Time Enough at Last, with a long pull-away crane shot. So that is Serling, the master adapter. But getting back to Obsolete Man, the theme, I identify Serling's core theme as the individual against the state, man versus society, standing up for your beliefs against censorship, against all odds. Some of the greatest episodes of the Twilight Zone, and those were themes that were in Serling's earliest works, his 1950s live teleplays that he won Emmys for. Patterns is about an old executive being pushed out by a younger one. Requiem for a Heavyweight, his second Emmy, is the Jack Palance as the older boxer on the edge of retirement, still trying to stay in the game, literally. So these were themes of Serling's that were part of his core. And then the last theme is called the time element, because so many of the greatest episodes, there are 14 episodes. And interestingly, Serling wrote, I think, 12 of the 14. And Serling was somebody that was very concerned with time. His father died at 53 from a heart attack. He died at 50 from all those cigarettes he smoked.
Yeah.
And what he witnessed in World War II as a young man, like a whole generation, the death that he saw gave him recurring nightmares, what we now call PTSD, what they call back then shell shock. But that informed the outlook of life on the Twilight Zone. The greatest time travel episode, Walking Distance, the 5th episode to air, is maybe not only the single greatest time travel episode of the Twilight Zone, but it was recently voted at one of the Serling conventions in Binghamton the greatest single episode of the Twilight Zone. About a businessman, Serling's doppelganger, that goes back in time and meets himself as a child and gets to talk to his parents, especially his father. Serling, when his father died, he was still overseas in 1946, and they wouldn't even let him go home to bury his father. Now, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in World War II.
100%.
To me, for a Jewish son not to bury his father, are you kidding me? So, Walking Distance, which I call the Citizen Kane of television, because it's just as perfect in all its creative facets. But when he gets to talk to his father at the end of the episode, that is Serling having the talk with his father that he never had. And I talk about this in the essay in my book. So Serling, had this sort of vision of mortality. And that's why it's interesting that 12 of the 14 episodes in the time element theme are written by Serling or adapted by Serling.
Do you think him, due to all the problems he was having, constantly fighting the network and the sponsors?
Well, that was in the 50s, which was what made him go to the Twilight Zone.
Right, but even then, like, he would throw a couple. I think I've always gotten a feeling, because as you learn a little bit more about him, and I'm not a biography on Serling, but I know what the business is like when you have to fight the money, but you're trying to create an art piece, and sometimes I know people that,
Struggle of all artists,
yeah,
writers,
and throwing those digs in a way where, but the advertisers aren't smart enough to kind of get it.
You see some of that in the Mike Wallace interview, and
Yes.
Arlen mentions that in his book.
By the way, that's one of the greatest interviews of all time. If you want to see Serling as the visionary of the 60s, it's in his response to Wallace's thinly disguised put down when he said, so, Rod, now that you're doing the Twilight Zone, does that mean you're not going to be writing anything important for television? I mean, are you kidding? But Serling answers it in his black suit with the white, with the white shirt, the black tie, with a smoking cigarette. And what he says in response, what he talks about how I believe television can be an art form, even in its half-hour state, that it can say important things. He comes across as a visionary of the 1960s when commercial art would become art, a la pop art, a la James Bond movies, Batman, the 60s, the pop culture explosion. It starts with the Twilight Zone.
Something I think I had a conversation with Mark about it earlier, just when I was asking him to come on the show, and because I always want him to be here. If he's bringing me a guest, and I appreciate Mark for bringing the guest on, I'm all about promote and whatever. But something I noticed is when writing these scripts and producing these programs that he did produce, specifically the Twilight Zone. And let me remind you, a lot of these shows that are really popular, like Star Trek and the Twilight Zone, they got shut down a couple of times, but pop culture and brings it back. But he was writing. I think he's the guy that his medium, the master illusionist, like Dali was on canvas for most part, he is on digital television. And let me also state that I think it was at a time when he was actually doing real great episodes. Most of the crap you get today is phoned in. It's the same thing. It's like boy meets girl, girl's a werewolf, move on, next. And then let's change it out to, Serling was like, we're starting here, we're going to do here, we're going to arc a little bit here, come back. There is substance to it. And if it wasn't for him, I don't think we would have had some of the best TV. I think a lot of writers write, with him in the back of their mind in some way, shape, or form. Do you agree or disagree?
Yes. Are you kidding? When Vince Gilligan ended Breaking Bad, it was being called by critics one of the greatest TV shows of all time. And TV Guide interviewed him and said, Vince, they're calling your show that just ended one of the greatest shows of all time. How would you like it to be remembered? And he basically answers, if 50 years from now, my show can be talked about like the way we talk about the Twilight Zone now, I'll die a happy boy. I point out in my book that I consider Serling and the Twilight Zone the fathers of American popular culture. Now, that's a
that
statement, but what I mean by that is that the creators of our modern, science fiction, fantasy, horror cultures were young people when they encountered the Twilight Zone. Stephen King, in his 1983 book, Dance Macabre, a nonfiction overview of the science fiction, fantasy, and horror genres, devotes a whole chapter to the Twilight Zone. And in it, he basically says, the Twilight Zone ignited the sparks of our imaginations, my whole generation, to experience possibilities for our own works that we never thought possible. What did he mean by his generation? Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, James Cameron, on and on. And their descendants, the J.J. Abrams, Chris Carter, the list goes on and on. And if you point out any modern science fiction, fantasy, or horror product, I can pretty much connect it back to the Twilight Zone in less than 6 degrees of Serling. which is a pun on
That's great.
bacon.
Yeah, no, I got the 6 degrees of separation, but
In my book, in my preface, I end it by stating that the Twilight Zone is the father of American popular culture. The last sentence in the book at the end is me restating it's the father of American popular culture. The 68 essays in between are me stating my case. So
Right.
I challenge every reader of my book to do that, to watch the episodes in the order that I write about them in these themes.
and
And-
something I didn't mean to interrupt you, Arlen, but I wanted to point out to everybody that's listening and paying attention and watching. This is one of the few people you will meet that actually says there's a bunch that are crap. And I love you for doing that, because there are a shitload that are crap.
So let me just explain that.
Yes.
I'm very critical of all the things I love. Comic book history, the music of Bruce Springsteen, my other two major areas of pop culture history. And when it comes to the Twilight Zone, the 156 episodes, 18 of those were 1 hours. I consider over half of them what I would call dogs. Now, there's various strata of dogs, but I forgive the Twilight Zone for those episodes. Why? Churning out a weekly TV show back then, that was anthology, where you didn't have the same sets every week and the same characters to write for. You had to create a whole new world literally every week, and on the budgets back then. So the fact that I chose 68 out of 156, I compare it more to a baseball slugger's average. 68 out of 156 is like batting 435.
Right.
Serling wrote 92 or 3 of the 156 episodes, some of the best and some of the worst. But 41 of those 92 or 3 episodes are in my book. That's like batting 460 something. So being creative on a weekly treadmill churned out, in my opinion, 68 episodes that either touched me emotionally, whether I saw them as a kid or whatever, or touched me intellectually, made me think about the high and low culture that surrounded the Twilight Zone, these episodes that made them both of their time and timeless, which is the definition of art. I did webinars during the pandemic shutdown called Twilight Zone in the Age of Corona, because so many of the great episodes are about solitude. Again, the first episode, A Man in a Deserted City, right? People turning on each other. And I was able to do a webinar about that, because, again, the definition of art is it's got to be of its time and timeless. And Serling and Company's visions in those 25-minute episodes, especially, I believe, the ones I chose, are what I would give the aliens if they came to Earth and said, we have room in our spaceship for one show. What are you going to give them? The Sopranos?
Yeah, just watch this. No,
What are you going to give them? I Love Lucy? Seinfeld? Yeah. As much as I love Seinfeld? No, I'm giving them these 68 episodes with my book. And I'm telling the aliens, just like I tell all the potential readers of my book, now that the Twilight Zone streams on Paramount Plus, Pluto TV, whatever, and beautiful, they're showing the Blu-rays on those streaming services. Yeah, I suggest that you get my book as almost like a viewer's guide. Even if you know these episodes like some of us do, like the back of our hand, we've seen them literally thousands of times, and we keep watching them, right? You watch the episodes in the order I've written about them in my book, because even within each theme, I arrange them chronologically from season 1 to season 5, so you sense within the themes a development of that theme. But watch the episode first, and watch it with your significant other, because these Twilight Zone episodes are for men and women, for people to share, because they cover all the great issues in art and life and death, man and woman, man and society, good and evil, everything in 25 minutes. That's the genius of them, right?
That's what's so great about it.
Watch the episode, then read my essay. If I've done my job well, because in my essays, like I said, I connect these episodes to both the high and low culture that both preceded the Twilight Zone and affected it, or how the Twilight Zone went on to affect television, movies, modern art, popular culture, etc. And it's all in these essays. If I've done my job well, even the most ardent aficionado might think about something, might feel something, might learn something about that episode that they did not know before. And that's what I bet my money on. And
Right.
imagine that's for the aficionado. If you're the average fan of the Twilight Zone or the newbie, my essays might make you rewatch the episode to see all the things I point out in my essays that you might have missed. And I guarantee if you do that, because the episodes are perfectly arranged, it's like a Zen koan, the way I've arranged these episodes. And I can only talk about that if you've literally read the whole book. But
Yeah.
when you get to the end, and I restate, the Twilight Zone is the father of American popular culture. You tell me, if you read all 68 essays, that I have not proven my point.
No, I mean, I'm reading it, and I'm continuing to read it. Way too many things going on a personal level that doesn't give me the time. But what I like the style that you brought forth. I know that you have like a favorite episode. I believe it's what is it? Perchance to Dream, is it? Or I think I'm pronouncing that right.
It's one of my favorite, but it's not. Asking me to pick my favorite episode is like
Kind of, yeah.
your favorite child.
Yeah.
There's maybe a top 5 where it's like they're all equally great, and then you have to extend it to a top 10, and then the next thing you know, you got to have a top 20.
40 episodes later. No, I totally understand that because.
But there is one episode that separates itself from the pack, and that's Eye of the Beholder.
Yeah, that is always reference, probably one of the most reference, except for the oh god, I forgot the name. Yeah.
In my art book, every significant camera shot with the dialogue read so that you can read the whole episode and feel like you're watching it in print form. Why is that the single, maybe greatest episode, or just the most unique episode? Because the conceit artistically of not showing the doctors or nurses' faces, yeah, it's a little heavy-handed. If you know the Twilight Zone shtick, as I call it, if you already know that, you can almost predict, if you've never seen the episode, if you're a newbie.
Exactly.
Oh, I get it. They're ugly and she's beautiful. But that's not fair to the episode. You got to judge it when it was first aired, November 11th, 1960, when the Twilight Zone was only one season old. You got to put yourself in that first-time audience. It's like Stravinsky's Rites of Spring when there was a riot in the crowd.
Right.
I can only imagine what the original audiences felt when we saw those incredible pig faces at the end of the episode, the reveal. And I talk about this in my essay of that episode, which is the longest essay in my book. The masks that William Tuttle designed, he was the makeup designer of the entire series. They're both incredibly grotesque, but there's also something kind of funny about them. You know how people sometimes nervously laugh during a horror movie? Being able to ride that line right down the middle between comedy and horror is a very thin line creatively. Most people have never been able to do it. The Twilight Zone did it. Those masks, when you first look at them, the pig, the pig faces, the curled upper lip, you almost first think they're funny looking, but then you notice how horrible they are.
Yeah.
And if you saw that episode as a kid, like I did on reruns as a kid, that ending, those masks burned into your brain forever. And that is what makes that episode, it was artistically audacious to do that. And there's nothing ever been like it on television, even within the Twilight Zone. It stands out as a unique episode. So it may not be the greatest, although it's one of the great Serling themes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is the definition of art itself.
Yep.
You know, take time out to smell the roses. All of art is about creating imagery to make people look at it, read it, feel it, and take that back to their own life. That is the job of all art. So,
yeah.
So Eye of the Beholder, by the way, it is one of the great Serling scripts. It's one of his greatest themes because we are all Janet Tyler. That was the name. We're born with bandages wrapped around our heads, our individuality. It's our own jobs to unravel those bandages. Society would prefer us to be bandaged up, like Pink Floyd's The Wall, you know?
Yeah.
We are all Janet Tylers. And the definition of art at the time, 1960, you could see this episode as Serling's very subtle message to the nation's civil rights movement, which in 1960, with Martin Luther King, was just getting started. And the white hospital, you know, with the ugly woman who's told that she has to live in a ghetto, a ghetto designed for freaks. So that was both of its time, and yet the theme and the idea that we are all Janet Tylers is timeless. So I make a point in my book by the fact that it's the longest essay, that it is the single greatest Twilight Zone episode, if I had to pick one.
Right, and I wasn't even thinking about the civil... See,
that's my point.
Right, I wasn't thinking the civil rights angle on it, but I tried to explain this to people before because I do what you're saying. When you, even with history, when you read history, whenever, you cannot look at it at 2025 eyes. You have to transport yourself back to when it was and what was going on around you. And
that is a job of historians.
Yes.
Is to use whatever forensic evidence they could find. You know, these historians can get an arrowhead and figure out a whole society based on the arrowhead. I don't know how they do it. But my point is that is the job of historians. What I tried to do when I wrote these essays for my book, I've seen each one literally 1,000 times. I've held ideas that I ended up writing about these episodes my whole life.
Right.
But when I finally realized I'm going to put a book together, I rewatched them, and to quote my 8th grade science teacher, I took copious notes. And as I watched them, whatever they made me think and feel, I wrote it down. And like I said, it was either an intellectual connection to something before or after the Twilight Zone, or it was an emotional connection. Things I saw in these episodes sometimes that I maybe didn't consider, knowing that I was going to write essays about them. So that is how you let real life enter into your art, whether you're making a movie or a record. You know, the Beatles were famous for that. You know, they took phrases off the street and wrote a song about it, and it became, you know, 8 days a week and Drive My Car and stuff like that. So that is the way art works, or that's the way I approach these essays. And then I basically let the writing flow pretty stream of consciousness style. And I'm very proud of my writing. It's the best writing I think I've ever done in terms of, you know, nonfiction cultural criticism. Because like I said, whether you're an aficionado, in the same way I made you think about the civil rights aspect of that episode, the same year, Bryan and Mark, 1960, earlier that year, in the spring of the first season, Serling has an episode about a black boxer, Boley Jackson. It's called The Big Tall Wish.
That's with...
I was just getting ready to ask that question.
Now, I specifically point out that, in my opinion, Serling, at the time, there were no black people on television in dramatic roles. None. He casts a black man in a very dignified role. And his portrayal, even of black life, is very dignified. You know, they're not all drug addicts, you know, in the ghetto and all that. And he goes up against, of course, a white opponent who defeats him. But then, in true Twilight Zone, you know, science and superstition, his young black mentee, who he treats like a son almost, dreams the big, tall wish that his hero Bowley will win. And all of a sudden, in true Twilight Zone, you know, 360-degree reality shift, just when he thinks he was knocked out on the canvas, all of a sudden, the ref is holding up his hand in victory.
Right.
And the big white opponent is, and why do I stress the race? Because in the end, the kid tells him, Bowley, you can only believe you won, because he knows he didn't win. He remembers being down on the canvas. And the kid says, Bowley, you got to believe. If you don't believe, it won't happen. And sure enough, he says, kid, I've been knocked down too much in life. I can't believe in magic. And sure enough, Twilight Zone reality shift, he's back down on the canvas.
Yeah.
He originally was. So again, what is that episode about? I've read every book about the Twilight Zone and episode guides and descriptions. You think anybody pointed out the fact that, in my mind, this is Serling's message to the nation civil rights movement in the spring of 1960, saying if you don't believe in the rightness of your cause against a bigger, stronger white opponent, you will lose.
Yeah.
You will only win if you believe literally in the magic of the minority that can overcome. We shall overcome.
And that's been used numerous times, and Mark just disappeared like a freaking Twilight Zone episode right there. But you know what's interesting
is, I guarantee you that even the most ardent Twilight Zone aficionado has never thought about that episode that way.
Right.
That's an example of what I bring to these essays in my book.
And it's very interesting because you do have a really, really keen eye and a nice perspective, and the historical aspect of it. And it's like nothing like this is, don't get me wrong, it's kind of cute. You get to read about the episodes and you can pick something out. Your book is a totally different ball game.
Again, there have been many books about the Twilight Zone, different aspects of the show. Somebody wrote a book, Mark Davidziak. Everything I needed to know, I learned in the Twilight Zone, which was a pun on everything.
Yeah,
I need to know, I learned in kindergarten, whatever that book was. But that's the closest book to mine. He chooses episodes and talks about their philosophical, real world application kind of things. But trust me, now there's a bookshelf of books about the Twilight Zone.
right.
Whatever episode guides, usually they cover all 156 episodes. But again, you know, Mark Zickery's book was the foundation. It started it all. But again, there are no episode essays like the kind I've written.
There's never been.
See the Twilight Zone again in a way you've never seen it, looked at it, or felt about it.
How is it? Because the forward is done by his
daughter.
I mean,
and Serling.
How was that? That was like, you know, I must have been like, oh my God.
Well, let me tell you something. My father died when I was 4 months old. My mother, may she rest in peace, raised my older brother Steve and I by herself. She didn't remarry till I was 17 years old. And I never knew my father. He was a face in a photograph.
Right.
We didn't have videos back then.
No.
There were no recordings of his voice even. So where did I find my surrogate father figures? In the pop culture, the comic books, the superheroes. But Serling had to be that avuncular father figure, talking about morals and ethics, and the things that I imagine a father is supposed to teach a son. I learned through heroes like, Rod Serling in the pop culture. Eventually, Bruce Springsteen, even though he's only 9 years older than me, was a kind of a father figure. I worked for the great comic book artist Neil Adams.
Yeah.
Was 17 years older than me, could have been my father. So I found my surrogate father figures in the American pop culture that I grew up with. But by doing my first book and now this book, and all the lectures, you go to my website, there's a whole Twilight Zone subpage of many of my other Twilight Zone related works. I imagine I've treated Serling's body of work like a son would treat and honor his father's work, maybe. But that's what I've done with my work. Everything I've done is an homage to Serling. And, you'll get that from these essays in my book.
Right. And I also want to show you, it's scrolling across the bottom. This is Arlen's website. And please go to it. If I'm really big on autograph copies. Can they order?
Yes, you can see there's a subpage devoted to the 5 themes of the Twilight Zone. And that will get you a signed hardcover versus going to Amazon, to get, that. But if you want a signed hardcover, support your local freelance artist writer. But yeah, you can definitely order it right through my website. There you go. Double your money back if not satisfied. Some interesting articles, my press coverage about the book from last fall when the book came out. Last year was the 65th anniversary of the series debut, and December 25th was Serling's centennial. The nice Jewish boy born on Christmas Day. Did I lose your sound? I can't hear you.
I do this all the time. I said when everybody gives you a hard time, I'm like, by the way, Jesus was Jewish. So
really, thanks for that.
Yeah, his mother thought he was God. But on that, one of the things when I started learning about Plato and the allegory of the cave, the first thing I went to was Twilight Zone.
Okay, I don't know the allegory of the cave. What is that?
It's basically about a group of individuals being they see an image on the wall. They're prisoners and they're in the cage, and then one of they mistake the shadows for reality, and then they go outside, and then one of them experiences those shadows are from trees, and it comes back in to explain it, and they're like, they don't believe him, so they get rid of him.
Wait, they don't believe him, and they what?
They eliminate him. Yep.
Is that how it ends?
Yeah, that's for the most part. That's
okay. So what does that mean? Meaning,
well, it's just
we create our own reality. What is that? What is
that? I mean, to a certain degree, sometimes what we see with our eyes is not necessarily the truth. And what Serling would do, for example, like that perchance to dream. You get into that, and if you look Beaumont. And if you look at it, and I think he's bringing in a little bit of Shakespeare in there, but I'm not a big Shakespeare person. We're going to have Ron in a couple of weeks.
Just the
Purple Testament
dream. That's the only Shakespearean thing about
it. It's like, this is what happens when you, not like maybe as delusional, but when you are tired and you're not thinking and you see something and then you automatically put.
Okay, so Brian, you brought up that episode.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of what my book is about. What is Perchance to Dream about?
Well,
are you familiar with the episode?
I am familiar with the episode. I it's kind of hard because I think of it as
you're on trial here.
No, you could put me on trial.
I'm putting on trial. You just got to answer the question.
I think it's someone who's
what when I say
is sleeping is almost day sleeping. And goes to get help, but that's all a dream, and he just freaks out, and in the end, dies in the dream.
So again, this is like being back in grade school. Don't tell me the plot, tell me the theme. What is Perchance to Dream about?
Don't believe everything you see.
Is that what happens to the character? He doesn't believe what he sees?
He's terrified by what he sees or experiences.
Well, it's in his dreams.
Right. But that's, I deal with a lot of people.
What does he dream about? Well, what are those nightmare visions that he has?
Well, I did agree with, he's a carnival, the woman, I forgot the character's name.
Tell me about the woman. Maya the cat girl.
Right. And it's her eyes, it's her body, it's seduction.
Of course.
And It's basically it's pre-wet dreams.
What happens in his dreams that gets him to the point where he thinks he's going to die? What happens?
Well, he feels that she's trying to kill him for the most part.
On what? The roller coaster, remember?
Yeah. Well,
one of the greatest roller coaster horror scenes ever filmed for television or movies. That's the definitive. That's what I mean about the Twilight Zone being, and,
right.
And so many of the great episodes, they overlap my themes. That's both the suburban nightmare. We've all thought about being on a roller coaster and jumping off or being thrown off, right? That's a nightmare.
Yeah.
But there's an episode, right? In my essay for Perchance Dreams. So you might say it's a metaphor for, sexual libido. It's all about the alluring woman. Are you kidding? She's built like a brick,
she's going in a tunnel. You get the...
Okay, but
yeah,
remember the idea that what freaks the guy out at the end is that he sees the secretary of the psychiatrist that he's talking to all episode long, and the secretary is the same woman as Maya in his dream.
So
Okay, so this is a perfect example. When you read I guess you didn't read my essay. Episode.
I read the essay. I read the
if you read the essay, then what is the episode about? I don't think you read the essay.
Well, you're again. I'm looking at it a different perspective because I feel like a more normal end on it.
If you read my essay,
he's having a dream within a dream, he freaks out.
Describing the plot and not the theme.
I don't. Well, then enlighten me, because
I'm going to point it out to you, because either you didn't read the essay, because then you would know what I'm talking about. What I point out is a couple of clues that Beaumont gives you throughout the episode.
Right.
The psychiatrist asks him after he comes out of one of his nightmare reveries. He says, "Who is this girl, Maya? Have you ever seen her before?" And if you pay attention to dialogue, the Richard, what's his name? The actor, he was Barzini in Godfather, Conti. Yeah. He says, "I don't know, maybe somebody I saw on the street." Now think about that. He thinks he maybe saw Maya on the street. And these nightmare visions that he relates to the psychiatrist throughout the episode are about the girl that he might have seen on the street, but in his nightmare visions, she is the sexual magnet pulling him towards his death.
Right.
Not towards making love and joy, but sexual attraction, seductiveness, the ultimate, male nightmare of being seduced, but not to love, but to your death through the sexual attraction. And what happens? He sees the secretary and he yells, "Maya," and then he jumps out the window, right, to his death.
Yes.
Or so we think. Remember at the very end of the episode,
he's on
the couch dead. He didn't jump out the window. And the psychiatrist says, I forget what the secretary's name is, Miss So-and-so, "Can you come in?" And he just came in. He lay down on the couch. I told him to lay down. And a minute later, he let out a scream. And now he's dead. Now, the final narration says, some say a dream can last a second, but in that second, a man's lifetime. You can suffer and die, and who's to say which is the greater reality, that which we believe or that in dreams? And I'm paraphrasing. These are philosophical issues that writers and intellectuals and philosophers have been debating for thousands of years, right? Row your boat gently down the stream. Life is but a dream. The Eastern mysticists talk about this, and look at modern paranormal, whatever. We live in a construct, right? The Matrix. This is what an episode like this dovetails into which I point out in my essay. But here's the thing, that based on Beaumont's own clues, I draw this distinction in my essay that I guarantee you nobody's talked about.
Right.
Yeah, he saw the secretary on the street. He lusted after her and stalked her. Remember, this is 1959. And this is a modern parable about male sexual obsession, about stalking women. He saw her on the street. He was attracted to her. He ends up making an appointment. He probably follows her up the elevator and sees where she works. He makes an appointment to see the psychiatrist. That's what the episode is about.
So you, well, a lot of times,
my point, I'm not making that up.
No, I'm not saying you are. What I was trying to get to, that was something I thought of in the episode. Maybe he did see her, but he's so crazy or delusional that he's now
think about our modern context of the Me Too generation, of this idea of stalking, which we weren't talking about in 1959.
No.
And this was what serial killers like Ted Bundy would do, would see pretty girls on the street or whatever. This, like I said, I'm not projecting my own ideas onto this episode. I'm taking the forensic artistic clues that writer Beaumont literally lays out. In one of his nightmare visions, he's in the tunnel of love. By the way, the tunnel of love, are you kidding me? Hello. I even point out, the labial metaphor, right? And she says to him all of a sudden out of nowhere, "We've been expecting you, Mr. Whatever his name was, Edward." Okay. The very first line earlier in the episode, when he walks into the office, the secretary with the camera shooting her from behind says, "We've been expecting you, Mr. Hall." So think about that. You think I'm making that up? No, Beaumont put that in to basically tell you, the viewer, that, this guy stalked this woman.
He's nuts.
Followed her up to the office. And in the end, he kills himself. The heart attack is the price he paid for basically projecting his obsession by casting her as the seductress, as Maya the cat girl. He's taking the blame of his sexual obsession of stalking her and blaming her. Talk about blaming the victim.
Yeah.
And I talk about this in my essay, and I guarantee you, nobody, from the aficionado to the newbie, I bet has thought about what we are talking about right now and what is in my essay to that episode, which I'm very proud of.
I think you should be very proud of it. I'm actually gonna get your book for a friend of mine who's a huge Twilight Zone fan, and I don't think
get him to buy a book. It'll be I'm going
to. He'll be up at Sisters in Westchester, so we'll probably stop. Like, hey, Arlen will sign it. But you know what? You are seeing what I love about what you do, Arlen, is you see it from the historical perspective, and then from a different one, and it's fantastic. And I really do appreciate it. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Are you doing any more presentations?
Hey, you haven't let Mark ask one question.
Okay, well, I want to tell you before.
Come on,
just so you know. Hold on, we'll get Mark in there in 2 seconds. My favorite episode of all of them is The Howling Man. I love that.
It's interesting. That's a very beloved episode. It's never been in my even top 50, but I know why people love it, and I talk about it in my book. We love having the devil visualized. It's maybe the greatest depiction of the classic, horn with the cloak and the pitchfork and the whole thing. But of course, it's in the deception that the devil tricks us, that the devil can take a pleasing visage. And Beaumont, that's one of his great episodes. But here's again, I point out about that episode that I bet you haven't thought about. The episode airs in 1960, right? In the second season of Twilight Zone, a week before Eye of the Beholder, by the way. And again, the idea that the devil was kept in a cage for the years between the two wars, but then he was let out, which caused World War II, right? So the guy traps him again. And then we get to the end of the episode, and what happens? He tells the maid, I got the devil in my closet. Don't let him out. Well, what does she do the second he leaves? She opens the thing and lets him out.
Yep.
Here's what I point out in my essay, Bryan. What happened in 1960? The devil was indeed let out and took the shape of the Vietnam War, of the Kennedy assassination, the two Kennedy assassinations. What resulted in Mick Jagger in 1969 singing
for the
devil. But Beaumont, again, unconsciously, subconsciously, by ending the story and ending the episode, the devil was let out in 1960, except we didn't know it then. It was only a television show.
I mean, I love that piece of it. It's really important.
Did you ever think of, as somebody that thinks
No,
that?
I didn't, because,
did you ever think about that?
No, I didn't, because
I've done proof positive, right? I've just proven my case.
No,
somebody's favorite episode has an aspect to it that they never thought about. So, Bryan, give me my props, man.
No, I'm giving you your props, and I'm telling everybody go out and buy the book.
Yeah,
come see you at the lectures. So I love the fact. I love the you can catch the devil by the tail, but you can't keep him. Type of very interesting, clever, but for the time, the transformation from the man to the devil was so advanced, in my opinion. It was like
artistically, the directors. Yeah. That was directed by Douglas Hayes, who also directed Eye of the Beholder, who directed The Invaders with Agnes Moorehead, where it's almost dialogueless and she's chased around by the tiny aliens that we think are aliens, right? Douglas Hayes directed some of the greatest episodes of The Twilight Zone. So that transformation, which everybody remembers, is, for its time. You can see now the editing, that the way they did it. But for 1960, it was pretty much state of the art.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Yeah, and then he goes up like I said, I point out that the appeal of this episode to so many Twilight Zone fans is, I think, it's classic Gothic horror. It's the only episode of its kind that takes place in the classic haunted castle. These are horror tropes that particular episode, the personification of the devil, the tilted Dutch angles in that episode. And that's why, again, people love it. It's not one of my favorite episodes. I understand why people love it. I tend to like the episodes that are about the early 60s Serling doppelganger man in the business suit, where his life has gone totally upside down. Those are my favorite episodes.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's the if you ask, we used to sit there in summer camp and watch on a small TV the Twilight Zone marathon.
Yes.
Before I let Mark Ant ask the last question of the night, because I do have to take care of some family related issues, something of interest. I was blown away, but I could see it now that Rod was one of the writers of one of my favorite movies, Planet of the Apes.
Yes, the classic ending, the greatest movie ending, along with Rosebud.
Yep,
is the Statue of Liberty.
Up. Yes,
and that comes from a Serling episode in Science and Superstition in 1960 called "I Shot an Arrow into the Air," and where the American astronauts think they're on a desert planet. It turns out they're outside of the Mojave Desert, near Nevada.
But something of interest that you may be interested in, many, many moons ago, they did an auctioning of movie props, and I bid on, in the scene where Taylor is running and escaping, he runs through the funeral, and there's an orangutan priest, and there's a big coffin there. I bid on that coffin. I missed it. I was off by 13 grand.
Mark, you got to ask the question.
That's the question, Mark.
Okay. Since you are an art historian, your essay on the lonely links over 50 years of the development of robots in art. I was really fascinated by that. I think you did a fantastic job of the genre's most famous robotic icons is the mechanical Maria from Fritz Lang's 1927 classic Metropolis, the model George Lucas used for Star Wars male robot C-3PO, and we get into Salvador Dali. That's one of the highlights for me of your book.
Thank you.
It's more of a compliment, but it's a great book. Mark, can you hold up the book one more time so everybody can see it? It's available. Is it available in bookstores as well as on the website?
No, it's only through Amazon. You can get the hardcover and the soft cover that Mark's holding. But I urge everybody, you got to get the signed hardcover from me.
Yes.
This will become your new favorite book. I guarantee it.
And I'll put the links everything into the description of this. Arlen, I can't thank you enough. We got to get you to come back about celebrate.
I've never even talked about comics or whatever, but
I want to.
If you want to have me on,
I'll get into the comic end of it.
James Bond, Twilight Zone connection, something we want to save for part 2?
Yes.
That's a whole nother thing. Okay, Bryan, thank you so much for having me. Mark, thank you for setting this up. You're the 5th Beatle in my life.
And I want to thank everybody for coming into the show. Next week, we have the Michigan UFO crew and sightings and paranormal encounters. But I thank you very much, Arlen, for being here. God bless. Go out, get the book. And if it wasn't for all of you, I wouldn't be doing this because I do appreciate you. Thank you. And you all have a great night. God bless.
You, it's always been you. God showed me you. I have been searching decades for you. I found you, I lost you. My heart is broken without you. My soul aches for you. I need you, I want you. My days are filled with you. I've seen the future with you. My home is with you. I have felt the future with you. My nights are filled with you. Love is you. True love is you. My happiness is you. Every past life is with you. My dreams are filled with you. Life is meaningless without you. My future is with you. I will fight for you. I will defend you. I will give up my life for you. Whatever it takes for you. Nothing else matters but you. I love you. I love you. I love you. God showed me you. I have been searching decades for you. I found you, I lost you. My heart is broken without you. My soul aches for you. I need you, I want you. My days are filled with you. I have seen the future with you. My home is with you. I have felt the future with you. My nights are filled with you. Love is you, true love is you. Love is you, true love is you. My happiness is you. Every past life is with you. My dreams are filled with you. Life is meaningless without you. My future is with you. I will fight for you. I will defend you. I will give up my life for you. Whatever it takes for you. Nothing else matters but you. I love you. I love you. Life is meaningless without you. My future is with you.